I just want to do a mic check all around the room, all around the space. I want to make sure I could be heard. It's not that you necessarily want to hear me, but if you want to hear the others, you need to pay attention for a minute, please. So I just want to do a quick mic check. Is the outside okay? Can you hear me outside? All right, great. How about the county cullen room? Do you hear the kind? Okay, how about upstairs, the loft? Everybody hear me up there? All right. Everybody's good? Do you want us maybe raise the volume a little bit more? Are you guys okay? You want the volume up a little more? Maybe a little more. A little bit more. I see a little thing here, a little more. Okay. All right. I'm gonna ask for some points of cooperation, please, for everyone. I know this is an unconventional space. We like to think of ourselves as unconventional, but we also want you to please be mindful that this is a program that we have in place for you, a very rich, beautiful program, and we need everyone to please refrain from conversations while the program is going. So if you have a friend of yours or someone speaking to you, just go shh. So just to get it out of your system right now, why don't you just say hello to the person next to you and just say one last goodbye for the rest of the time. You will not be talking to each other. All right, just get it out of your system. Let it go. How many of you were at the march today? All right. What a day. Sometimes the heavens just conspire to make the most glorious day ever. And today was one of those days. I don't know how many of you know me, but I'm Andy Shalal. I'm the owner of Busboys and Poets. And I'm thrilled and excited to be here. This is one of I tell you, I have the best job in the world. To be able to be amongst such beautiful people all the time. This is what our community looks like all the time. This is what the world should look like. This is what DC should look like. This is what everything around us should look like. I think we all would probably agree. I moved to this country in 1966. The march happened in 1963. I wasn't here at that time. In 1966, when I moved to this country, I learned about this thing called race. I had no idea what the fuck people were talking about. And I learned about race in a very strange way when I got enrolled in school and I had to check white or black. I turned mine unchecked. I had no idea what to put down. And it's been an interesting conversation that I've had internally and externally about this issue of race. Race is everything in America. It's so pervasive, it's like air. It certainly is in this city. When my family moved here, we lived in Virginia in 1966, it was illegal for a black person and a white person to marry and live together in Virginia in 1966. A lot of young people can't imagine that, but that's true. We are certainly a lot closer to the idea of equality, but we are still a ways away from justice. And I want to be able to say that because it's in light of what just came out with the Washington Lawyers Committee on Civil Rights, that report that just came out about the numbers of incarcerations that happen in this city and the disproportionate number of African Americans that get arrested. And there's some interesting statistics. In this city, 1 out of every 3 black men has been to jail. Now, I want you to think about that for a minute. 17% of every black person in the city has been to jail. We have poverty in this city, but it just happens to be 98% of poor people are black people in this city. In many cities. I know DC, and I can just tell you the reality of that. The fact of the matter is that we continue business as usual is really quite disturbing and certainly tugs at my heart and my soul and my mind. It's something that I don't want to see continue. This is a situation that is not tenable, a situation that's not sustainable. We are all in on this. This is not just one person's problem. When our chief of police says that she doesn't see color, I admire the fact that she's able to do that. But at the same time, it really is disturbing because color is real. In this country, in this city, right now today, color is very real because even though drug use among white people and black people is the same, black people are arrested 85% of the time. These are not just accidental numbers. These are numbers that have been going on, and it's played hundreds of times, if not thousands of times by now, all over the country, all over the world. He's played it everywhere, and the guy who took it to the road is Brian Jones. He is a remarkable actor, and I remember meeting Roz Zinn one time after we had already produced it, and she says, "He's so much better than your guy." And I agree. He has done an incredible job with this amazing play to be able to share the stories that Howard Zinn wanted us all to know about. So I'd like to bring up to the stage now the one, the only, Brian Jones.
Thanks, bro. Andy Shalal, my publicist, ladies and gentlemen. Hello, as Andy said, my name is Brian Jones. Welcome to this event. For those who are watching on the live stream at home, I'm not sure if you're aware of just how many people are here at Busboys and Poets. This is not your normal Busboys and Poets event because we have people I just want to paint a picture for you at home. We have people all over the bar, people all over the staircase, people who are not even in Busboys and Poets, but they've gathered from outside the fence and the patio. So please just make some noise for a minute for the folks watching the live stream if you're here for this event right now. That might give you a sense of just how many people are here. The event that we're here for is called MLK, Trayvon, and the fight against racism today. First off, of course, we have to give thanks to the incredible people here at Busboys and Poets for hosting us and agreeing to do this unconventional event in this unconventional way, especially Andy Shalal, Layla Shalal, and Pam Pinnock we want to thank. Please give them a round of applause. And also, I want to draw your attention to the people who really organized the event and who organized the live stream, and that is Haymarket Books, publishers of a book and a few books I'm going to talk about in a minute, and wearemany.org, which is, if any of you are here and you have friends who want to watch this at home, please text or tweet or Facebook them right now to go to wearemany.org. That's where your friends and family and coworkers and colleagues can pick up the live stream. Let's give a round of applause to Haymarket Books and wearemany.org. Thank you. I would say, besides those two faces, the other face that I saw on T-shirts, on placards and signs, more perhaps than those two or as much, was the face of Trayvon Martin. So many thousands of people came out to this march today, in some ways to criticize the current administration, to say that there is not enough being done for African Americans, for young people who can literally be killed with impunity in August of 2013. Some people are critical of Obama on the other end of the spectrum, of the Democratic Party, and some even of our underlying social order and economics. We here today have a fantastic panel to try to discuss these issues, to try to discuss with us what it means to look back on that 1963 moment and try to learn something about what we have to do today in 2013. I don't know if people here know him, but he's about to come up. We have Gary Younge about to speak up here. Okay, so you do know him, that's good. We have the amazing Keeanga-Taylor, who's gonna come up after him. And rounding out our program this evening is Dr. Cornel West. Now, limitations of the live stream format and even of this incredible space and crowd that we have are going to prevent us from having a whole lot of discussion. So for the purposes of the live stream and the logistics of the space, we're going to have each of these three speakers And then we're going to cut off the live stream, and as much as time allows, maybe if you stay put, we'll allow for some questions and some back and forth. After that, after we have discussion and we wrap it up and applaud everyone and decide to go home, those of you who want to pick up this book can line up over there by the elevators and have Gary Younge sign it. I want to draw your attention to this book for a minute. This is The Speech, the story behind Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream. This is I can't recommend this enough. It's a very brisk read, and it's a book that tries to delve into that moment in 1963 and understand it in light of our present predicaments. It's perceptive and thought-provoking, and the author of this book, this brand new book, The Speech, is Gary Younge. Please welcome him to the stage right now.
A little bit smaller than Brian. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Busboys. By some people on the left, and had conversations with people who I wanted to say, do you think even Dr. King would be invited to this march? Do you think that if he was invited, would he invite these people? Would he invite Obama? And a sense that, like, somehow, and this is people on the left, somehow there was something just a little bit lame about this whole enterprise. And to that notion, I want to say, look, we're living in a country where some people truly believe that we're in a post-racial society, that there are some people who truly believe that there must have been some justification out there somewhere for Zimmerman to shoot a young boy on his way home from the store, that somehow we are over this thing. That's how it was presented to the Supreme Court when they gutted the Voting Rights Act. There was a problem, the lawyer said, and it's over. And so when tens of thousands of people come to Washington to protest racism and to demand jobs, then clearly we've shown them that it's not over. As far as we're concerned, it's very much not over. Now, back in '63, as they built the coalition to create this march, Bayard Rustin each day would talk to his young workers in the organizing center in Harlem. And he would say originally they were going to march on Washington. They were going to snarl up the traffic. They were going to get in the congressmen's faces. There was going to be an unemployed worker speaking. And each day he would come back and say, okay, we've got to drop this, and we're going to drop this, and we're going to drop the other. And the youngsters would shout, oh man, you're turning it into a circus. They would cry, sell out. And so there are probably people here today, left-wing as they are, who may not have made that march, who may have decided that it was, even in '63, that it was too weak, that it was, or that they were too strong. But there was one thing that Bayard Rustin insisted on, and he said no politicians, no paid politicians will speak from the stage. That was one concession he was not prepared to make, because the march was about talking truth to power, not about giving the powerful a podium from which they could sell their lives. And that's one big difference between the march then and the march now. But also, as we reflect on it and we look at the way it's been packaged, and I would call it misremembered, we see this sense of, or an attempt to paint this march as a huge patriotic moment, a moment when Americans came together for a day to challenge this bad thing. That people try and wrap this march in the flag and sell it back to us as a wonderful patriotic moment in America. And they can't do that. We can't let them do that. What this march was a massive multiracial dissident act. It was a radical act, and nobody wanted it to happen. Kennedy didn't want it to happen. The Justice Department put a kill switch on the mic that day for fear that someone would call for insurrection. And they planned to pay Mahalia Jackson singing "He's Got the Whole World in His Hands" if anybody cut up rough from the mic. They policed the march in '63 like it was a military operation, literally. It was called Operation Steep Hill. They had helicopters ready to go. They had boxcars, flying boxcars ready to go. They had something in the order of 30,000 troops ready to descend on DC and quell what they thought was going to be a violent act. There was no violence that day. Only 3 people from 250,000 were arrested. And as it happens, they were all white. So where did that moment come from? And here, I'm just going to read a little bit. Birmingham, Alabama, a burly white police officer attempted to intimidate some black school children to keep them from joining the growing anti-segregation protests. They assured him they knew what they were doing, ignored his entreaties, and continued their march toward Kelly Ingram Park, where they were arrested. A reporter asked one of them her age. 6, she said, as she climbed into the paddy wagon. The next month in Mississippi, a stalwart civil rights campaigner, Fannie Lou Hamer, overheard Anel Ponder being beaten in jail in an adjacent cell. "Can you say yes, sir, nigger? Can you say yes, sir?" the policeman demanded. "Yes, I can," she said. "So say it." "I don't know you well enough," said Ponder. All books about all revolutions, wrote the Polish journalist Ryszard Kapuscinski, begin with a chapter that describes the decay of a tottering authority or the misery and sufferings of the people. But they should begin with a psychological chapter, one that shows how a harassed, terrified man suddenly breaks his terror, stops being afraid. This unusual process demands illuminating. Man gets rid of fear and feels free. Now, the period preceding King's speech at the March on Washington was one such chapter. Until that point, there had, of course, been many fearless acts by anti-racist protesters. But in that moment, the number who were prepared to commit them reached a critical mass. In May '63, the enfranchisement that came with it were the order of the day. The longer America practiced legal segregation, the more it looked like a slum on the wrong side of history than a shining city on the hill. Now, that was the time. That was the moment. And all of those examples of the 6-year-old, of the woman saying, "I don't know you well enough," these were examples of the grassroots really running away from the leadership. That what we get in '63 is the leadership, King, Roy Wilkins of the NAACP, the Urban League, running to catch up of great women. One thing that we forget are the hundreds and thousands, the young, the people who made that possible, that 6-year-old, the kids in Birmingham, the woman whose name you don't know, who said, "I will not say yes, sir," and so on and so forth. That history is made by these people. It's not handed to them by the people that we have heard of. So '63 was really a set of demands in search of a march. The demands were out there for equality and for justice and for jobs. And in the end, they realized that they had to have this march, come hell or high water. Today, I think, and here I want us to be somewhat reflective, what we have is a march in search of demands that I saw lots of different people arguing and calling for lots of different things. And it was, as Brian points out, telling that of all the faces on this march, Trayvon Martin's was, I think, guilty. From sit-ins and freedom rides, we have gone into rent strikes, boycotts, community organizations, and political action. And as a consequence of this natural evolution, the Negro today finds himself stymied by obstacles of far greater magnitude than the legal barriers he was attacking before. Automation, urban decay, de facto school segregation. Sounds familiar. These are problems which, while conditioned by Jim Crow, do not vanish upon its demise. They are more deeply rooted in our socio-economic order. They are the result of the total society's failure to meet not only the Negro's demands, but human needs generally. Now, I think that what Bayard Rustin is talking about there, these on the individuals, of course, the individual case and the horror for Trayvon Martin's parents and his life, all significant. But to pretend somehow, some way, that Zimmerman had to wake up and think, I'm gonna kill myself, a black boy today, that's not how it happened. That's not how it needed to happen. That Trayvon Martin, historically, couldn't present his free papers when Zimmerman came and attacked. He couldn't justify his presence. And I don't think there are many black people here who haven't at some time or another had to justify their presence somewhere that they had a right to be. So racism becomes more subtle. And this is not an accident. It's like Jim Crow had a son, and the son was more polite. He knew not to use cuss words. He put his white hoodie a whistle. Now, the other thing that's happened is we moved to a place where individuals can advance. It is possible. So long as they don't take anyone with them, individuals can advance. And so we move to a place where we end up really talking about photo opportunities rather than equal opportunities, where we want to look different and act the same. And so I just want to wind up by saying that we're in a moment where things are more, and it's been this way for a while, where things are more subtle, but as we know, no less deadly and no less terrible, that the discrepancy between black and white in terms of employment is the same now than it was in '63. The discrepancy in wealth between black and white is actually greater now than it was in '63. We would be spitting on the graves of those who marched in 50 years if we said that nothing had changed. But we would be dishonoring them if we said that we had reached.
Jordan Davis was a 17-year-old African-American young man in Florida who was shot dead in November of 2012 by a white man named Michael Dunn, who complained that Jordan was playing his music too loud. Michael Dunn fired 10 bullets at a car playing the music that was backing away from him and is now trying to defend himself in Florida court under the same statute that he was the one standing his ground. Please give a round of applause to Jordan's family who are here to join us today to show solidarity. Thank you. And the little that I hope this does something to help this struggle. They have a website, and anyone who wants to express solidarity.
Instead, today's march included renewed calls from the grassroots, from the thousands of people who made their way, for action to respond to the numerous social crises that consume black communities across the country. The political demands intimated on the handmade signs of thousands of ordinary black folk at today's march mark a painful and damning continuity with the recent past of 1963. The march in 1963 was called to address, has instead been replaced by a nightmare of racism, inequality, and injustice. And this summer has been a powerful reminder that equality and justice remain fleeting. The Supreme Court gutted the most significant aspects of the Voting Rights Act, a centerpiece of the Southern Civil Rights struggle. And while Chief Justice Roberts claimed that, quote, things have changed as a pretext for gutting the Voting Rights Act, this was happening in well-being of a black child 58 years after the murder of Emmett Till. So there is much continuity between today and the civil rights era that produced the march 50 years ago. But there are also important differences that we must take stock of. The most important of which is that today this inequality and injustice is happening in the 5th year of the presidency of Barack Obama, the nation's first black president. And we have to say that despite his election to that office, things have not gotten better for African Americans. They have gotten worse. By every measure, every statistical measure of quality of life in this country, thing of post-racial or colorblind U.S. is a deliberate effort to strip the federal government and the private institutions that profit from this society from bearing any responsibility for the conditions that exist in African American, poor, and working class communities across the country. Instead of accepting this responsibility, is so tightly wound into the blood and marrow of so-called American democracy that it can hardly function without it. And politicians and pundits from across the political spectrum, from Democrats and Republicans to the black president himself, regularly condescend to and blame black people for the very conditions that are a product of this oppression and inequality. It is amazing that some of the most educated people in the world, when called upon to explain the persistence of inequality in the U.S., are reduced to incoherent and nonsensical blustering. They insist that black poverty is worse because of a lack of role models in black communities. They blame black parents. They blame sagging pants. They say work harder, as if the best parenting in the world or the best fitting pants in the world can bridge the financial gap between the $11,000 a year the U.S. spends on public school students compared between the $11,000 a year the U.S. spends per public school student compared to the $30,000 a year the U.S. spends to keep someone in prison. As if the best role models in the world or the most informed parents could stop the Chicago Board of Education from closing 54 schools in predominantly black communities. As if it could stop Philadelphia school authorities from closing 28 schools and laying off 4,000 workers in the public school system, while at the same time, the state of Pennsylvania spent $400 million on the construction of a new prison outside of Philadelphia. And so you see, the failure of one will lead to the success of another. And they closed our schools while Michelle Obama goes around the country saying too many of our kids want to be ballers and rappers and don't care about education, while at the same time they're closing the schools. And so the rhetoric of this self-help suggests individual efforts to maintain the boundaries that keep some neighborhoods and people who live in those neighborhoods from encroaching on the gentrified, rich areas of town where the real revenue is going. And that is simply because they don't have a plan for disposable communities that are filled with disposable people. And so when you close down the public schools, when you shut down the public housing, consolidate the public hospitals, close the public libraries, close the public clinics, it means you are creating a city for populations that don't rely on public services. And this is not just a continuation of the attacks of the past, but it represents new ways in the post-segregation era that black life is under attack, all the while race is never mentioned. But these are not just black problems. Those who run this country have long mastered using race, whether spoken or not only to divide a potential opposition to their plans, but to also implement policies and practices that were intended for one group while quietly being implemented for all. And so they use racism to explain away why they are closing all these public institutions that disproportionately service and assist African Americans. They are also legitimizing the idea that there should be no public services for anyone. So for the 20 million white people who live below the poverty line, and the 76% of whites who will experience joblessness, welfare, or other economic insecurity sometime over the course of their life, the acceptance of racism helps to justify the cutting of the very services and institutions that could mitigate the impact of the growing economic inequality they are facing because of an economy that privileges and benefits the rich and wealthy far beyond the vast majority of us. Understanding the ways in which both our oppression and struggles against oppression are linked is not about subsuming any one struggle for another. It is about coming to terms with a simple equation. How does the parasitic, socially useless 1% maintain their power and control over the 99%? Black people are unemployed because they are black. And the sooner people come to terms with this reality, the sooner we can disabuse ourselves of this ridiculous notion that we live in a colorblind or post-racial society. But we must do more than diagnose a problem. We must act, and we must act with what Dr. King described as the fierce urgency of now. The feeling of constantly being under siege can sow the illusion that maybe struggles don't matter, or that maybe we need to find a new way, elect an honest politician, or even a black president. But without struggle, there is no progress. The fight today is not the same as it was before. We are confronted by new attacks, but we still must throw ourselves into these small, local struggles to fight to keep our schools open today, to keep our hospitals and libraries open today, and to stop the evictions and foreclosures that threaten to undo our communities. But while fighting our local battles and struggles, we must also raise the larger questions. What kind of organizations and leaderships do we need? Today, too many civil rights leaders are more concerned about their proximity to power and the White House than they are concerned about placing demands on the presidency. But the exclusive focus on our individual struggles is not alone enough either. When King asked the question of where do we go from here, he raised critical issues that are just as important today. And I'm going to end with a quote from King, a speech that we often don't hear from, but one that was delivered to the his organization in 1967, a year before he died. When raising the question of where do we go from here, he said, quote, "We honestly face the fact that the movement must address itself to the question of restructuring the whole of American society. There are 40 million poor people here, and one day we must ask the question, why are there 40 million poor people in America? And when you begin to ask that question, you are raising questions about the economic system, about a broader distribution of wealth. When you ask that question, you begin to question the capitalistic economy. And I'm simply saying that more and more, we've got to begin to ask questions about the whole society. We are called upon to help the discouraged beggars in life's marketplace. But one day, we must come to see that an edifice which produces beggars needs restructuring. It means that this question, you begin to ask, who owns the oil? You begin to ask the question, who owns the iron ore? You begin to ask the question, why is it that people have to pay water bills in a world that is 2/3 white? And what I am saying today is that we must go from here and say, America, you must be born again. Thank you.
Yes. Innocent brother's life, and that we were going to have to do something if we were going to get racial justice in this country. This is a new book called I Am Troy Davis that's out just now from Haymarket Books. Our last speaker needs little introduction, I believe. I asked him how he wanted to be introduced, and he said, just call me Brother West. Ladies and gentlemen, Cornel West. Brother West. Like that, sorry.
Brother Brian, thank you, Brother Brian. Thank you, Brother Brian. Let's thank Brother Andy for bringing us together here, Busboys and Poets, in the chocolate city of Washington, D.C. And stigmatizing a people and niggerizing a people. And by niggerize, what I mean is keep us so scared and so afraid and so intimidated. We walk around with our backs down and laughing when it ain't funny and scratching when it don't itch, wearing the mask, just trying to get by rather than straightening our backs up. And that's what happened in 1963. And it wasn't just Martin Luther King Jr. The movement made Martin. Martin didn't make the movement. There's no Martin without Fannie Lou Hamer, without Ella Baker, without Stokely Carmichael, without so many nameless and anonymous ones. And there's certainly no Martin Luther King Jr. without his beloved mama and daddy, Martin Luther King the first and Alberta King. Give them all a hand. That's the tradition that we talking about. Don't believe that hype on corporate media and all of these television stations thinking that somehow Martin dropped out of the sky. No, he comes from a tradition that says that I am who I am because somebody loved me. And 1963 too, wasn't he? Oh, yes, he was. And what did he call the March on Washington? He called it the Farce on Washington. Brother Malcolm, we love you, you love us. Explain yourself, brother. That's Martin and the others leading the march. He said, no, the Martins died right before I introduced the moral conscience of this nation, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. You could see the coming together of the generations. And when W.E. Du Bois was 89 years old, they got a sense that John Lewis even given his curtailed speech. But they didn't get a chance to see Stokely Carmichael. He refused to go. He said this is a sanitized middle-class version of the real black movement. I love Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture. And we have to be able to embrace a variety of people with big banks and big corporations controlling both political parties and reshaping this nation and the whole world in their image. Don't talk about Martin if you're not going to tell the full truth. You didn't have no serious talk about the new Jim Crow and the prison industrial complex. You had some voices early in the U.S. people. I don't know about you, but for me, a child in Somalia has the same value as a white child in Newtown, Connecticut. I don't know about you, got the same value of a precious black child on the south side of Chicago. Same value of a brown child in East Los Angeles. Oh, yeah. And let us be very clear about this. Even though Malcolm called the March on Washington a farce on Washington, when he did history, y'all, we don't need no sanitized, sterilized, Santa Clausified history. We got to keep it funky, keep it real. And that's why when I heard the speeches today, I said to myself, oh, look at the magnificent majesty of the everyday people who are full of rage in the face of not just the legacy of white supremacy, not just the legacy of Wall Street oligarchic power, not just the legacy of the prison industrial complex or the corporate media multiplex. Decision made that would allow our brothers and sisters who've been in there for years to have that law apply to them so they can get out. Don't give me your bait and switch strategy. Say one thing and do something else. And they say, oh, Brother West, you always so hard on the president. No, 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 no. I'm doing the best I could do to love the people enough to tell them the truth. That's what the bottom line is. That's what the bottom line is. And you bring all those people together around the world, Wall Street oligarchs and big corporations that are global and international. That's the tradition we got to keep alive. Thank you all so very much.
Wow. Let's hear another round of applause for Cornel West. And for Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor. And for Gary Younge, y'all. Yeah. And thank you for coming out tonight. This concludes the live streamed portion of our presentation. However, I do want to say for those watching at home and for you here,